Welcome, listeners, to a realm where shadows dance and whispers echo. I'm your host, Rick Clifton, and this is Quills and Chills, the podcast that brings you face to face with the masterminds behind the macabre. In each episode, we journey into the minds of horror writers and filmmakers to uncover the secrets lurking within their tales of terror. From classic tales to modern nightmares, we'll traverse the corridors of the human psyche and unravel the threads of dread that keep us turning the pages or sitting out there in the dark. Welcome to Quills and Chills. Hello, and welcome back to Quills and Chills. I'm your host, Rick Clifton, and today we are talking with author and animator Marcus Kliewer. His debut novel, We Used to Live Here, began life as a serialized short on Reddit, where it won Scariest Story of 2021 and the No Sleep Forum. So welcome to the show, Marcus.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I am very excited to talk about this book. It is very creepy, and I love it. But before we do that, I'd love to get to know you a little bit. I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit about yourself and what inspires you creatively.
Yeah, so I've been doing creative stuff since I was quite young. I started doing my earliest creative stuff was stop motion animation with Lego when I was like 10 or 12 or something like that. And I've always been writing stories, and it wasn't until 2020 that it really started to pick up for me. And I think as far as inspiration goes, I would just say I'm generally just trying to write stuff that I find interesting, and if I find it interesting, then usually a few other people will as well. So, yeah.
Well, I would say you've hit the jackpot with this one. I actually really enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you.
I would love to have an entirely separate conversation with you one day about stop motion animation. I'm very
Absolutely.
intrigued by that. So, how did you said you found it at 10 years old. Can you talk a little bit about sort of how you found it, what made you fall in love with it, and more importantly, what fuels that level of patience that comes with stop motion animation?
Yeah, so it was actually my dad. We had an old camcorder. So me and my sisters would animate with Lego and Playmobil, and it was like magic to me. Like we would press the record button really quickly, and for people who aren't familiar, you're just taking a bunch of images and making it look like it's moving, like Tim Burton stuff. And what was the second part of the question?
So obviously doing something to that level requires a great deal of patience in working with stop motion animation. So how do you manage that? I mean, I think it's just probably something you get used to, right?
Yeah, I think I find it very addictive because it's very like every picture you're taking is contributing to the final art form. Whereas even with something like writing or traditional filmmaking, your edit, like a lot of stuff you do is going to get left on the cutting room floor. It's going to get deleted. You're going to cut it out. But with stop motion, you're seeing the final product as you're going. Like you might add color, you might do some other things, and that's really rewarding. So in a weird way, I almost think writing requires more patience for me than stop motion ever did. Like I found it a lot easier to sit down for like 6 hours and animate than I do with writing. But yeah.
I probably would tend to agree with you a little bit on that. I actually work in animation as well, but more on not so much in the actual animating, but we can talk a little bit about that later.
Oh yeah.
So talk about writing. What's your process for writing? Do you typically just dive in with both feet? Are you an obsessive planner? What's your style?
I'm definitely a hybrid writer, and it changes from every project. But generally, the thing I found out in the last few years is to just write it out in present tense. So I'm writing kind of in the style of a screenplay or a film treatment, if viewers are familiar with that, where it's basically just describing it like so-and-so walks into the room, sees a scary thing, this happens, X, Y, Z. Very simplistic writing, very, minimalist. And that process has helped me kind of figure out the story as I go along without having the baggage of writing in traditional prose. Because once I'm writing in traditional prose, I start to think about editors, I start to think about the final product. Whereas having that distancing and tense really helps me. I don't know if that makes sense, but
it makes total sense to me. So
cool.
As somebody that shares a passion for horror, I'm always very curious about how people find horror, how people arrive in this genre. And I'm curious as to what sparked your journey into sort of writing this book and, your journey into horror.
I think there was always a forbidden fruit aspect to horror because when I grew up, my mom was very averse to it. She's come around now, but understandably, you don't want children watching a lot of these movies. And so I think one of the first horror movies I saw was Saw, funnily enough, no pun intended, but I watched it and there was something about that idea of like, we're not supposed to be watching this. Like my friend and I snuck a DVD player into his parents' RV and we're watching it in there. And so I think that kind of exciting, oh, I shouldn't be watching this aspect of it. And then another angle that's always drawn me towards it, especially from a creative perspective, is I find it weirdly therapeutic because I'm taking things that have traumatized me or things that scare me and I'm monetizing them essentially, or turning them into something that's just out there. And it's like, it makes it easier to deal with on the page. So yeah, kind of a combination.
You and I are very much alike in that regard. It is like one of the first horror movies that I saw scared me so badly that I had to sleep in the living room by the fireplace with the fireplace poker all night.
Right.
And since then I decided that I was going to jump into this and I was just, I was going to face that fear, I guess, if you will. And I just have become such a big fan as a result. So I can totally relate where you're coming from in that regard.
Cool.
Do you have a favorite scary story from your childhood?
Yeah, I mean, ironically, it was in the same RV that my friend and I were watching Saw in. His parents had this like small trailer RV in their backyard, and we were out there, and I think we were like 11 or 12, and we started hearing these really slow footsteps outside in the gravel, and it was like a very slow and intentional pace. Like they wanted us to hear them, and it kept circling. It circled us, and we had to run from his house to theirs. So we're like just horrified, waiting at the door. Just slow pacing. No response whenever we said anything. And then I think it ended up being a raccoon. We never saw it, but I think his dad saw a raccoon out there the next day. But yeah, freaky at the time. That's the best I got.
That would freak me out too, for sure. All right, let's talk about this book, shall we? Let's talk about We Used to Live Here. It's being described as Get Out meets Parasite, and I can tell you, I think I would agree with that in many ways. It's, you know what? I'm just not even going to do it. I'm going to let you set it up. So I'm going to let you tell us what this book is about and kind of go from there.
Sure. I'm a terrible pitch man, but I'll try my best. Basically, a new homeowner gets a knock at the door and a strange family is standing there. And the dad claims he used to live in the house as a child and he just, wants to show his kids around. Seems friendly enough, but there's something a little off. And the main character is a people pleaser to a fault. And she lets him in to take a look around and definitely ends up regretting that decision. I'd say that sums it up.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly right. I think it starts out with something that we all sort of can relate to, in that it's the guest from hell, right? The guest that will never leave. And it just, I was like, when I dove into this, I was like, okay, how's this going to play out? And how do you do this, for 300 pages? And the way you crafted it just was like, okay, that makes sense. Okay, this works for me. So It just kept working across the board.
Thank you.
Before we get started, though, I got to tell you, we got to figure this out. Mo, I need an audio book of Mo's commentary, and I need it narrated by Mo. I have never laughed so hard at some of the stuff that Mo spits out. And you can explain sort of who Mo is if you want to, but that I need an audio book of that. We've got
right. So Mo almost got cut. I was very uncertain about keeping him in there, and I'm glad I did because a lot of people seem to like him. And, of course, some people don't. That's just how it goes. But he's basically Eve's inner monologue for her worst thoughts. And he's a little toy monkey she used to have with symbols that looks like a knockoff of that famous Jolly Chimp toy. And there is no Mo in my real life. I definitely have paranoid voices in my head. But yeah, he just kind of came out of nowhere.
No, I loved it, and I'm so glad you kept it because it was like every time he said something, I don't know, I just assign a voice to it in my head, right? And I'm just like, okay, I need an audiobook with this character because he's a lot of fun. So I'm glad you kept it.
Cool.
So let's talk about a little bit about your main character, your protagonist, Eve. She is, like you said, she is a people pleaser to a fault. She's a very complex character who goes through quite a journey in this story. And I wanted to sort of know if you could talk a little bit about her character arc throughout the novel and what challenges you may have faced in bringing her to life on the page. And I'd love to know how, like, this started out on Reddit. So I'd love to know a little bit about how that sort of came to be as well.
Okay, cool.
I just gave you two separate questions so you can tackle them however you want.
Sounds good. I'll start with the Eve one. I think there's a lot of myself in that character for sure, and I think there's always a push and pull with characters in horror movie. You know, like why do they go into the basement? Why do they do X, Y, Z? And I think with her, it's just this fear of letting other people down, this fear of making things uncomfortable, and obviously that leads to some pretty severe consequences for her. And I'd say some of the challenges with bringing her to the page was just I found it kind of draining to write, even though I relate to her character a lot. If I'm writing a character that is very anxious and paranoid, that tends to just seep into my mindset throughout the day, versus if I'm writing like a very confident, dominant type character, that can also kind of change how I'm feeling throughout the day, weirdly enough. And so I think that was a challenge. And yeah, that's all I can think of on that. And then the other part of the question was the Reddit one.
Yeah. I was kind of
Um,
curious, like, because every time I ask these questions, I'm like, well, I wonder if you did this in Reddit and how did it change when it went to the novel? And I just kind of love to just sort of take a step back and sort of understand how you started writing and developing this story on Reddit and how it sort of came to be a novel.
right. So it started it was a one-parter initially, and it had so much attention and so many people wanted more. I ended up expanding it into a 4-part series. And I think a lot of that, a lot of it was created with the feedback of the audience in a way. So I'd post one part and people would react to it, even though I had the whole thing plotted out. And then they would say like, oh, I think this is going to happen, or I think X is going to happen. I would kind of have to go in and adjust things and react to that in real time as I was going, because I had a week to edit it between each posting. So, and yeah, and that was like a huge part of it. And then it eventually got picked up for that big Netflix movie deal thing. And then that's where the novel kind of came from that. So this has been like the third time I've adapted the same story, which is a lot. But
And can you talk about the Netflix movie deal? I didn't bring it up because I wasn't sure how much you can say and how much you can't say.
I can't say much right now, but there's big announcement stuff, you know, Hollywood time, all that. So I'll just say exciting announcements coming soon for that
Great.
front. Yeah.
Perfect. Great. So let's talk about some of the other characters in the book. There's obviously Charlie, who I just love. She just feels so grounded to me and such an anchor for Eve in such a great way. And then there's Thomas. And I got questions about Thomas. But let's talk a little bit about Charlie. I mean, she seems, for me, I feel like as you describe, you tell me, but I feel like as you were describing certain characters and character types that you write, you feel it brings your mood up a little bit. And I feel like Charlie would be one of those.
Yeah, like Charlie is kind of a foil to Eve in a lot of ways, obviously. She's very upfront and direct for the most part. And I think there almost had to be that kind of counterbalance to Eve, because I think it's almost frustrating. It can be too frustrating of an experience if you are only with one type of character that is very people pleasing, even though those people do exist and I relate to those people very much on a personal level. If that's your only character in the story, it can start feeling like the same drumbeat over and over and over again. And so I think Charlie kind of provided that counterbalance to Eve's people pleasing and all that.
And Thomas, whoo, I don't want to say much because I don't want to spoil too much, but he is not what I expected him to be when I first met him.
Right.
Let's just say that. So
Yeah.
Got to be a fun one to write.
I really enjoyed writing Thomas, and he changed a lot throughout each iteration. Yeah, I'm careful not to spoil things as well, but they're definitely
we can move right off of
definitely
that.
a fun one to write. Yeah.
Perfect. Cool. All right. So I kind of felt like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my takeaway is this was equal parts human drama with a lot of drama, and equal parts haunted house, but not a typical haunted house in a way for me. I don't know if you would agree with that, but I was just kind of curious how you approached it in that respect.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. It's, I think, kind of balancing those two things and then having them become the same thing. Because I think a lot of times, especially for socially awkward people, the uncomfort is kind of the horror, and then that falls into full on the horror as well. So I think for me, it's almost impossible to not have those two things in a book. Like it's just how I write, and it's just what comes out. So
No, it was great. So again, I'm trying to think through this next question without being spoilery. There were different aspects of this story that were very complex, very, I wrote down the word, but I I hate to use it, but labyrinth even. And I was wondering if you could talk to me a little bit about your process for creating this. And this goes back a little bit to sort of the planning and all of that. How do you keep each aspect of the story, or, and again, I'm trying to be very vague because I'm trying not to spoil stuff, but
right.
how do you keep each aspect of it organized during the writing process? Or is that just how, maybe, I don't know, you tell me. I don't
I
want to talk.
kind of, so I have like a overarching thing in my head, especially with something as you use the word, I don't know how to say it, labyrinthian or yeah.
Labyrinthian, yeah.
Some might say convoluted, some might say complex, but I think I have an overarching thing in my head, and I'm trying to kind of follow that because I have a whole backstory that's not in the book, and like, you know, there might be stuff explored in future books as well, but like it's all in my head, and then I just kind of know that it's there, set it aside, and just write and let it go where it takes me. And then a lot of times I'll be reverse engineering stuff to make sense in my head. So I'll be like, I'll come up with some non sequitur scare, like there's something involving ants in the book, and it's like, okay, that's a scary image. Now, how am I going to pay that off later? You know, not everything's paid off in this book, or if it is, it's very subtly hidden in there, literally with secret messages and stuff like that. But yeah, so I'd say it's a combination of those things.
So, and again, without giving too much away, I want to know if you can tease sort of a pivotal moment or scene or something important. Doesn't necessarily have to be scary, but like an important moment in the book that readers should look forward to. There were quite a few for me, but there are two in particular that jump out at me, and I will just say it's the basement stairs with Eve
Yeah.
and the very end of the book. Because the
Okay.
basement stair thing, I swear to God, I almost threw the book down. I was like,
Right.
oh, because that would be a scary ass thing to happen to anybody, in my opinion. So
I think that scene has resonated with a lot of people, the basement stairs in particular. And I think there's something very primally terrifying about looking at something and thinking it's something harmless. And then, you know, the
it's not.
angle of the lighting changes and it's not. I find that stuff very creepy personally. I think for me, there's a moment, I think around page 200, where a character gets a strange phone call. I'll just say that much, in a motel. And that moment, people have seen variations of that scene before, but for me, that was kind of the hinge that everything pivoted on. It took me so long to figure out that moment. And so I'm really proud of that turn, I guess.
Yeah, it really worked because I found myself going back and forth like, that's not real. Okay, shit, maybe it's real. Wait, it can't be real, but shit, maybe it's real. So it was, and again, I'm being vague and coded, but it was great. I thought that was really, really great.
Cool.
I think my absolute favorite moment has to be the very end of the book, and we won't say what it is while we're recording or whatever.
Of course.
But the very end of the book blew me away. So, and we can talk about that a little later too. But wow, so really
Cool.
great, good stuff.
Cool.
So, on the opposite of that, is there a particular scene or moment in this book that you felt that you feel is particularly meaningful or maybe even challenging for you to write, and why?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the religious stuff, I had good parents growing up and all that, but like growing up in a religious environment, I went to religious schools, I went to Bible camps, all that. And so I think there was a lot there that I wanted to explore in more depth, but just every time I sat down to write it, I felt like crying. So I just kind of left it, maybe in a future book. And I think that stuff, and then a lot of the stuff in the third act, without getting too much into my personal life, but there's a lot of like I've had a lot of struggles with mental health issues and all that, and so some of this stuff where it goes was challenging to write for sure, but therapeutic ultimately. Yeah.
Well, I thought that was a really important aspect of the storyline as well, in sort of how you handled the mental aspects of this book too. And again, I've said this 10 times, and I'll caveat it. I'm not gonna try and spoil anything, but there's definitely the twists and turns of this story really sort of lean into that, and then you're like, where's this gonna land? And it ends up in a place. I thought it was handled very well. I'll just leave it at that.
Cool.
So.
Cool.
Is there anything? So I know you did some edits to the book. Is there anything that you edited out of the book that you would have loved to have kept in?
I wouldn't say love to have kept in, but there was definitely stuff I had to let go of. There was a moment where she finds a journal in the basement that explains way more about what happened with Thomas and his alleged sister. Whether or not that's real is a whole other thing. But it just slowed down the pacing so much for her to find this journal. And it also would have made me solidify a lot of things that I wasn't ready to solidify. So that was one major thing. It was almost like there's almost 50,000 words of deleted content for this book. So there's a lot, but that was
Wow.
all of them. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Yeah. I mean, it's fantastic you have 50,000 words that you had in this book that you had to take out. I think that's the writing of that alone is like, I think about how hard it is for me to write. And I think it's fantastic to me that you were able to get that out. So
cool.
So you've kind of answered this question a couple of times for me, and I'm just going to ask it officially. The way this book ended hints at another book in the works, perhaps. So it sounds like there might be.
Yeah.
So what you can talk about and what you can't, but
it's very much like it has to be the right story, and I have to be ready to write it. I'm not working on any direct sequel right now, but I can say it definitely seems like there's more story to be told there, and I definitely have ideas for that. So no official announcement, but something will happen probably.
Well, I love that the possibilities there, because I really want more. So if it comes to be, I'll be the first one on board for it. So, all right, I'm going to switch gears just a little bit here, being mindful of our time. But what's your favorite? Do you have a favorite underappreciated novel or genre that you like?
Sorry about that. Favorite underappreciated novel or genre that I like?
Yeah, and maybe underappreciated is not the right word. Maybe could be. Do you have a favorite novel or genre that you are actually a fan of, other than horror?
I was really influenced by a book called The Road by Cormac McCarthy. It's a pretty famous book. It's not obscure at all. And that's a post-apocalyptic book about a father and son kind of navigating a ruined America. And I think as genres, I don't know. I watch I'm finding myself gravitating towards really light kind of comedy stuff. I just started watching a show called Hacks, and I find it's like a nice, it's great. I just started it, but it's a nice reset for me because I am writing such dark and horrible stuff all the time. It's nice to just watch something. I mean, that show has darkness in it too, but
Hacks is amazing. I'm jealous that you're just starting it. I am just finishing it up, the latest season, and
nice.
It just gets better. Each season just gets better and better. So
cool.
It's going to be a great one for you. The book is called We Used to Live Here. It is everywhere on June 18th. And it's also right behind Marcus there too. I love the poster. It's fantastic. As we like to say here at Quills and Chills, please support your local bookstores whenever possible. So, Marcus, how can our audience find you on social media?
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram at Marcus_Kliewer. I'm sure the spelling or link below or whatever. And then I have Twitter as well with the same handle, which I'm listing.
I'll put that in the show notes as well, so it'll all be
Cool.
there. Marcus, thank you so much for talking to me today. I really appreciate your time, and I really enjoyed this book. So I'm fingers crossed for the audio book from Mo, and fingers crossed for the follow-up story to this one. So
Cool.
all right. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next time on Quills and Chills. Thanks for joining me on another episode of Quills and Chills. I hope you enjoyed our deep dive into the mysterious and the haunted. If you're enjoying the show, don't forget to support us by subscribing on your preferred podcast platform and leaving us a rating or review, because your feedback helps keep those chills running down both our spines. And feel free to share the show with your favorite fellow horror enthusiasts. Also, if you guys have any spooky stories, strange encounters, or paranormal experiences of your own, I'd love to hear them. Reach out to me on social media or email me at quillsandchillspodcast@gmail.com. Who knows? Your story might end up on a very special episode. Anyway, thanks for listening, and I will see you back here next time on Quills and Chills. Bye, y'all.